Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Alvis, Montgomery College. I'm also the editor-in-chief of JSEALS, the Journal of the Southeast Asian Linguistic Society. I am extremely pleased to be able to share some data and ideas at this very interesting conference. I very much appreciate this. Thank you very much, Dr. Liao, that is Cho-Jan, and I'm looking forward to seeing other papers as well. Of course, my time here is 9 p.m., not 9 a.m. like it is in Taiwan, so I'm not sure how late I can stay up, but I'll do the best I can. So the scope of my talk here, the topic is etymologies of mainland Southeast Asian regional words in the cultural domain of ceramics. And by regional words, I mean they are truly widespread. Most of them are in multiple language families. And so I'm not talking about single loan words, or I should say loan words between two languages, something like that, that are very, very local, such as Malay into the Semai language and no others, or Vietnamese and into Bacau and no other. It's widespread. You'll see the data. And this involves historical linguistics, but I do have to address the issues of archaeology and ethnohistory. And I think that's essential to do. And it'll be interesting to see what other people do in their talks at the conference with language contact. The geographic focus is mainland Southeast Asia, but we have to talk about bordering areas, southern China, nearby, insular Southeast Asia, and India. There's lots of contact, and you'll see how it works, but focusing on mainland Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, some Burma, maybe the northern part of Malaysia. Lexical categories, mainly pottery, but also ceramic production, including kilns and bricks. And I will focus on words for earthenware and stoneware. Some of these things can be made with other materials and other types. This is my main concern. You will see why in another slide or two. The time frame focus, if you want to call it a focus, from about 4,000 years ago to the mid-second millennium CE. However, most of the words in the study have histories in the Common Era. Now, here's a thought. This scope constrains the study, but it also reflects actual patterns in the lexical data that mark mainland Southeast Asia as a region in contrast to the bordering areas. So yes, there are words that extend into other areas, but there are some that are really focused in this language area, as mainland Southeast Asia is often considered. So what are ceramics and pottery? This is linguistics, but I do have to address this. Ceramics are any objects made of clay combined with other ingredients, like those, and fired at high temperatures. Right? That's basically it. Anything you do can be ceramics. Now, pottery are ceramic vessels, things you put stuff in, pots, cups, bowls. That list is obviously longer than that. Other ceramics include bricks, roof or floor tiles, pipes, cooking implements, and such. I'll talk about a couple of these. Types of ceramics, as I mentioned, earthenware and stoneware. Of course, we think of porcelain. Earthenware is more porous. Water can get into it. Lowest temperature. It's earliest in the archaeological record. Stoneware is later in the archaeological record, non-porous, kind of like that picture on the side there, okay? A little bit of shine in there. Sometimes they use the term vitreous, kind of glass-like a little bit. Higher temperatures required. Porcelain, the pretty stuff, right? That's very vitreous, translucent sometimes, refined clay. And it's much more recent, although China, of course, is the center of the innovation of those things. But I'm concerned with earthenware and stoneware. So the timing and means of the spread of stoneware production from China into mainland Southeast Asia is a significant topic in archaeological studies. And so it's something interesting as well for historical linguistics. We can address that issue in looking at these etymologies. So my recent work on terms for pottery and ceramics in mainland Southeast Asia, I not long ago gave a talk on words for pottery in mainland Southeast Asia. You can see that there if you want. I've expanded on this considerably, a lot more data, and over the summer I wrote a couple of articles expanding the topic, research and topic, an article there in Nguyen Nga coming out in a little bit. That one's in Vietnamese, but I'll share it in English online. Another article that is in English for another conference, 60 plus words, Vietnamese words for pottery and ceramics. And so, and I'll write up this current talk. So I'm involved with this for now. And so let's consider the sections of this talk. Oh, before I do that, look at that nice picture up there, the Han terracotta miniatures, the so-called Ming Qi. And but this from northern Vietnam is sort of at the well, in the Eastern Han period. So there's example of that kind of north to south spread of ceramics. So I will first give a brief overview of historical ethnolinguistic periods with respect to ceramics. Just one panel. It's a lot of information for one panel, which means it's simplified. Description of lexical data sources and methods of gathering and assessing the data. A few panels on that. And then most of my talk will be a summary of the regional pottery words and related topics of ceramic production. Right? So let's get started with the periods of linguistic ethnohistory with respect to ceramics. And so if we're talking about mainland Southeast Asia, we talk about the Hua Binian culture. And you can see there, that's very deep past. And basically, I would call it the period of we don't have any information about the linguistics, language situation of that, but there was earthenware, only from some 6,000 years ago, 4,000 BCE, later than it was up farther north, but still quite deep in history. Then the Austroasiatic dispersal at that 2000 BCE period, it's pretty well established in archaeological literature that Austroasiatic dispersal was at about that time, and Neolithic farmers basically bringing agriculture, but also their own earthenware tradition. So earthenware has been in mainland Southeast Asia for several thousand years. The next period we can consider is early Indic and early Chinese contact in mainland Southeast Asia. It's still in the BCE period. I think there's enough information to, if it's not strong contact, certainly the Western Han was in North Vietnam, but Indic, early indications of Indic contact. So in the Indic tradition, it was earthenware still. The Chinese had developed stoneware, and apparently there's evidence of early porcelain actually in northern Vietnam, the Han Dynasty. In the Han Dynasty proper, in the Common Era, the Han Dynasty expands into northern Vietnam, and then we start to see mainland Southeast Asian kingdoms of the Monic, Khmer, Chamic, and kind of later, somewhat later, not too, Tibeto-Burman kingdoms, right? In the early to mid first millennium. Again, there are earthenware traditions for all of these. We see Chinese stoneware in Angkor towards the late first millennium CE. That's what I read in the archaeological literature. Okay. Oh, and by the way, I am not an archaeologist. Being well read in archaeology doesn't mean I'm an archaeologist, but I do my homework, and I consult archaeologists when I write things and say, is this okay? And they give me ideas and help me use the information effectively. Okay, and then the Dai kingdoms in mainland Southeast Asia, and a growing regional maritime trade in the second millennium CE. Okay, thought. Austroasiatic, I'll put AA for Austroasiatic, is the longest residing existing language group in mainland Southeast Asia. We don't know about the Hua Binian group, so Austroasiatic is kind of a central point of reference for language history there. You'll see that in how I present some of the information. Okay. So let's just take a quick look at the digital lexical resources that are available to us now in the 21st century for mainland Southeast Asia. And so we have the Austroasiatic, Austronesian, Kredai, and Sino-Tibetan, lots of databases for all of these, okay? And tremendous amounts of information, both modern languages and reconstructions. It's just fabulous. Published reconstructions for many groups now. And these are the things I'm checking. Okay, the Southeast Asian language dictionaries, the CLang, all of these. Using this allows me to search. If I search for a word, I don't just get one entry. I get all entries that have a certain word, right? So it allows you to do a semantic domain checking very effectively. The South Asian language digital dictionaries for Sanskrit, Pali, and other Indic languages. The fabulous Xiaoxue Tang is just with hundreds data on hundreds of Chinese dialects. And oh yes, ancient texts too for Chinese, Old Khmer, Old Javanese, for Vietnamese, the Nome Foundation. That's a lot of data, a lot of massive quantities, high quality data. We can sift this easily, much more than just 15 years ago. Okay, so this is, I hope everyone is doing this if they're doing this kind of research, because the resources are fabulous. And anything that was published before just 20 years ago, everything has to be rechecked basically with these sources. So methods, these are the data sources I've just mentioned. It's lexical databases, digital dictionaries, proto-language reconstructions, textual databases. I use a wide range of terms in the domain of semantics, much considerably longer than that one I provided before. I assemble them into lexical worksheets, and I assemble the lexical data, I highlight elements, note key patterns. I'm not a computer, but my brain finds these things as best I can. Then I recheck when I have new data, new ideas. It's about 150 pages of these kinds of notes for this talk. Etymological categories, of course, the donor languages, as I'm trying to identify things, identify recipient languages as much as I can, right? Some are uncertain. We don't know what the language origin was. And some I just have to exclude. I say, well, these are chance partial similarities. And it's very important that we are able to exclude things, especially in mainland Southeast Asia, where there are a lot of monosyllabic words. And it's just easy to say, oh, this looks like that. And no, it's not. And we have to find, regularity patterns and such. So I do try to determine approximate earliest evidence of words' histories. And earliest evidence doesn't mean the time when it was created. It just means how much information can I get for when it might be attested. So, we look at historical phonology. We try to find patterns that help us look at that. If it's a proto-language form, that can give us information about the approximate timing or relative timing, at least. Textual data, very powerful. I'll show you samples. The archaeohistorical information, I have to be able to say, well, this was here in this time or it was not. And in some cases, it's simply unknown, and I have no way of determining the chronology. And I have to acknowledge this. I don't just make a chronology and say, yes, I think it's this. I'll say there is not enough information. Okay. On the limits of the data, there's a huge amount of data now, but there are still gaps. There will always be gaps. So anybody who's doing field work, do more field work. We need more data. Nevertheless, despite these gaps, negative evidence can be informative. And I will show you examples. If I can find large numbers of languages in a certain area that have a word form, and then in another area, large number of languages don't have them, I think that means that it's not in that area. Okay, it means not in that second area. We have enough evidence where negative evidence does actually mean it's not there. Okay, you see the data. Semantic variation is the last thing I have to grapple with, because there is a lot of semantic consistency of the word forms among the languages, but also many word forms with varied semantics among the languages. And there are changes, so something might be cup in one language, bowl in another language, plate in another language. But there's a lot of consistency, but we do see this because they change along structural parameters, functional parameters, cultural parameters. This is an issue I addressed in the SEALS talk. I won't talk too much about that in this one. So the language sources, the primary language sources for these regionally attested word forms for pottery, Austroasiatic, okay? And I consider them innovations, except possibly one of them, which, might be a true Proto-Austroasiatic word. I am not yet sure about that. Uncertain sources, several items. Chinese loanwords, 10 items. That's a big number. And there are other words too. I haven't talked about the bricks and kilns yet. Those are additional numbers. And there's some others, Dai, Indic, and even English, although English is colonial era. But I put it in there because it's kind of interesting anyways. You'll see. All right, so these are the primary sources, and I'm going to cover them. Austroasiatic words, okay. So here's how I present it. I put the word forms on the left side. I use all caps, this che, glach, ktong, kal, bang. And I'm using that because you can't reconstruct words if they are in 3 or 4 different language families. So it's just it's a notation to stand in notation for proximate word shapes, okay? The earliest evidence So for example, this one I say, well, it's pre-tonogenesis in Vietnamese, so it's probably from the first millennium at some point. And here's the only textual evidence I could find for that. I couldn't find it in other languages. So, okay, so these are my notes. And then here's the geographic distribution. AA again means Austroasiatic. MSEA means Mainland Southeast Asia. And so you can see the 5 Austroasiatic branches, and I list them there with some shorthand. Chamic, okay? So you can see that. So let me look at a couple of examples, all right? Just a couple. Oh, and I guess I should mention this briefly. You will notice that these are largely contained to Austroasiatic, these specific forms. Yes, some of them have gone into Thai and Lao, but not too much more. And so it's actually pretty constrained. That's the way I view it. And I'll say something about that at the end. So let's look at this kal word, the drinking bowl. Okay, so how do I reconstruct drinking bowl, by the way? I have to look at those forms. So in these 4 Austroasiatic languages, we say some kind of drinking bowl. For Proto-Monic, small cup for offerings, okay? But the phonological form is pretty clear, okay? Kal, it's there. Old Mon, 1,000 years ago. Excellent. That's very useful information. It's at least 1,000 years old. We don't know how much older. The Vedic form, the Tavung language, Khan, with a final N looks funny, but it doesn't look funny when we look at the diac forms. And so Thai and Lao with that Khan form with the final N, and we expect that. We expect L to N for Dai languages. So here's a hypothesis. Possible Mon Kingdom era, monic lexical innovation. I think that's based on this data set, I think that's a reasonable hypothesis. I'd still need some more ethnohistorical data if I could get it, but I think this is not unreasonable. I think you'll see so. This is my approach. Okay, one example of here, jar. You see that nice picture there. We, of course, have no idea whether this word is related to that jar. We don't know. And again, more ethnohistorical information would be needed. I put the picture there just to liven things up, but it doesn't mean that I think that this specific word is related to this specific type of jar. I have no idea, and I don't know who does. It would require field work to figure something out like that. So in 5 Austroasiatic languages, pretty much spread across mainland Southeast Asia, from east to west, north to south. Old Khmer text, 1,000 years ago. Again, good. We know it's at least 1,000 years old. Okay. At first I thought it was in no other language. I couldn't find it, and then I did find one in Cham. So pretty restricted though. That's interesting. It's not like I could not find it in a Dai language, right? You'll see I've got a lot of Kradai data. It's not in there. So here's the thought. Mon and Khmer are often in the geographic center of these words distributions. I think this means these may be, some of them, may be examples of early spread of these types of pottery from those kingdoms. But again, we need some ethnohistorians to check into this. Okay, let's move to Chinese. Now, first I'm going to look at Dai words because there are reconstructions. And Lee's 1977 Proto-Dai, Johnson's Southwestern Dai, Joe Pidiaporn has also done this, but I've picked these out. So looking at pottery words. So here are a couple, and I've checked other data, and it looks like, you know, okay, there are a couple of words here. This Tuoi word is very widespread, actually, in multiple branches of Kradai. But then here are the other ones. These are all reconstructed by Lee and or Johnson, and they are all Chinese. And it's pretty clear that they're Chinese. And the forms are very good. The tones are very good. We can debate them a little bit. I wonder about the plate cup one in the middle there, the John word, which is an A tone. It should be B or C rather. But maybe there are notable number of words that are widespread Chinese loanwords in Dai. But I think they may be both from the pre and post tonogenesis periods, and so we might not always get the tones matching, but that's okay. You can see that these are Chinese has significant influence in this domain. Okay, some Chinese loanwords for pottery terms. There were 10 of them, right? Here are a few. The first two you can see there, this Jan or Jen word, Jok word. Both of these have textual attestations that put them well into the back into the first millennium CE. They're quite widespread too. Several branches of Austroasiatic widespread in Dai, and some of them into Malayo-Chamic as well. I'll show some examples, panels with a couple of those words. Oh, these last two, I don't have much information. At least I can find them in Vietnamese texts to the 1600s, which gives them some substantial historical data. But the historical phonology of these, it's just not informative. I can't make any decisions about how old these might be in languages. They're level tones, and there's not much to say, not much to evaluate them with. These are interesting. This ang, eng, and ong forms. At first, I thought, oh my goodness, what's this mess of similar looking stuff? But of course, in Chinese, you can see ang, ying, weng. Three different words. Two of them happen to be types of jars, but slightly different jars. And they are pretty widespread in both Austroasiatic and Kradai, and then that one in the middle in Mianic and Karenic, and the other one in Lolo-Burmese. Pretty widespread, right? These, I believe, this Bei Ping Wan, I believe these to be somewhat more recent. They tend to be less widespread in mainland Southeast Asia, more in southern China. Okay, so let me look at a few samples. That ang form, and I've translated I reconstructed the meaning as cup, pot, bowl, basin, because it does have quite a range of meanings. We'll see here. So here it is, and ang in the Shuowen Jiezi, the dictionary there from the Han Dynasty. So it's got some substantial history in Chinese. In Kradai, it's widespread in Dayak, mainly mainland Southeast Asian Dayak. However, that is for the Dayak, it is mainly in mainland Southeast Asia, not the Dayak that is in southern China as much. Okay, it is also in Kham, Gra, and Hui, so very widespread. In Austroasiatic, a good number of branches, though a smaller number of languages have the form. Sometimes the vowels are a little bit off, but the meanings are consistent. And then the other word forms are consistent. So I think we're looking at, it's not, they're not confusing the vowels. Those represent vowel changes in the languages. We'd have to look at them more carefully, but that is basically the case. In Vietnamese specifically, ang with the level tone indicates that this is a first millennium CE borrowing. I've written about that issue. The Sino-Vietnamese character reading ang with a different tone is from a later period. So it's got pretty good history in the region. So my thought is, first, it goes from Sinitic to Kradai, then Northern and Vietic, but later there's complex spread into mainland Southeast Asia, meaning Chinese, Dai, or Vietnamese, all as potential donor languages later. Here's that ong, or earthen jar form. There's a picture there, and it was labeled in the museum there, Wuhan Museum, Weng, specifically that character. This one, I found it tested in the Li Ji Book of Rites, so, Warring States period, BC period. In Kradai, very widespread, okay? I don't list all of the phonological forms. I'm listing all of the languages and lects for them. That's quite widespread indeed. In Austroasiatic, we see ong, big jar, earthen jar. I think this is probably from Chinese ong, right? It's pretty clear. Tibeto-Burman, there is this one. I would need a Tibeto-Burman specialist to check this, but I think this reconstruction looks reasonably similar. So my thought is, this was likely first from Sinitic into Kradai. I'm not sure of the timing. I would need help figuring out that base. I think you could check that by the tone, possibly. And then later from Dai into Austroasiatic in the second millennium. That's what the data would show. And if we know a little bit about the ethnohistory, we know a little bit about the historical phonology, and that's what seems reasonable. Okay, this Chok word for small cup, that's this word here. the Shao or Zhuo. Again, Li Ji, Book of Rites timing, so it's got some good depth in Chinese, pretty widespread. Mainly, I find it mainly in mainland Southeast Asia dialect, as opposed to southern China, which is kind of interesting. That it's spread in a different way. In Austroasiatic, look at this. It's in Old Khmer, in before the dialect expansion. That's significant. In Vietic, I don't see it in Vietnamese. It is even in Malayo-Chamic, in Malay and Rade. I'm not sure how they got in there. I can't say that. But what I think is this. This is not in Vietnamese. It is in Old Khmer. So it is possible for this to have been directly from, early Chinese varieties into Old Khmer before the Dai expansion. I think hypothetically it means it could have even been spread into dialect languages from Khmer, but I don't know. That I won't speculate that much. But that's what this data looks like. The explanation would require a direct Chinese to Khmer borrowing. Okay, other language sources, Dai and possibly Southwest Dai, these two forms. There's that Tuai form there, cup bowl. I don't know of how old it is. It should be pretty old because it should be, pre-proto-Dai, I guess, if it's in Gamsui as well. That's possible. Pretty widespread in Austroasiatic as well. Then we have Indic, Persian via Indic, and English glass, obviously, that's the modern era. Okay, these two there. Okay, this one is attested in Old Khmer texts 1,000 years ago, widespread in Austroasiatic. I'll talk about that one. I've got a little panel for that one, but this one is interesting. It's mostly in Austronesian languages, but it made its way into some Austroasiatic languages. Okay, so let me look at a couple of samples a little bit more. Here's that bot word, and here is a picture of one from the 6th century, so quite old actually, right? From Sanskrit Supatra and later Pali Pata. And the Chinese character here, Mandarin Bo, doesn't help very much. It's in Cantonese Put. It has u in a lot of Yue and Pinghua dialects. Min has wa. Only Hakka where Hakka dialects is where I could find a instead of u. The Austronesian Old Javanese Patra, okay, that shows a little bit of that original Sanskrit form. When we look at Austroasiatic, we see pretty consistently at with the a vowel there. Also, Old Khmer, we see Supatra. So 1,000 years ago, it looks like a pretty direct Sanskrit loan word. Vietnamese is complicated because bat is actually the Chinese character reading, meaning potentially borrowed from Chinese rather than from some other language in mainland Southeast Asia, but I just cannot know. We cannot know. In mainland Southeast Asian dialect, we have it as well. So here's what I think. It's obviously tied to the spread of Buddhism because it's the alms bowl for Buddhist monks still do that in mainland Southeast Asian countries. The Sanskrit or Pali word likely spread into major language groups in both mainland Southeast Asia and Chinese, basically, and then to minority languages. But the details we can't have the details of that. Too complicated. The Tuai word there from Dayak and also Gamsui. Oh, look at that. That's a lot of languages, dialects, and just lects, right? We don't know. It's very widespread, and so should have considerable history. In Kredai, I don't know if it's Proto-Kredai. I would let specialists decide that. It is also in 6 branches of Austroasiatic. And Vietnamese is specifically interesting because this word doi has the tone which makes me think this could have been borrowed very early from Dai, before the Dai expansion. That's what the tone and the vowel tell me. I'm not 100% sure of this because I don't have lots of words for this. Maybe the next talk will help. We'll be talking about that issue. But I think the hypothesis is that Kredai, this word was from Kredai into Austroasiatic, more likely than the reverse. You can see by the numbers of languages. It went into Vedic, as far as I can tell, based on the tone, before the Dai expansion into mainland Southeast Asia, and then spread to other Austroasiatic languages. So that's what the data suggests, I believe. Okay, the last category of uncertain source languages here. These are spread throughout the region, and yet they are not concentrated in a way that shows me that one language is or one language group was the innovator and donor language. Okay, they're in multiple branches, but I cannot determine the time of them. I cannot determine which is the source language. Okay. Let's look just at this one sample. Cham, the dish and bowl, that is not the ethnonym cham. That is the word that we, okay. And again, there's a nice picture of a bowl from this region in this proximate time, but who knows if this word has anything to do with this specific bowl. We don't know that. In Austroasiatic, we see 4 branches. Okay, pretty clear, large bowl, some kind of bowl. Dish or tray, but reasonable, not too outrageous. In Dayak, it's only mainland Southeast Asian, and then it's in Chamic, Cham, and Radha Cham, and I can speculate and say, is this the ethnonym to the word, like we use in English? China is porcelain, right? I don't know that. There's no way. It's unknown origin of this word unless new linguistic information, archaeohistorical information can be provided. Okay, but the information is there. See if someone else can explore it. So what does this lexical data suggest about the spread of innovative pottery practices in mainland Southeast Asia? And here we've got a nice little picture of another terracotta miniature, another Ming-Chi, a potter sitting outside of a kiln. This is in northern Vietnam from the Han Dynasty. So again, we see some evidence of the spread of this practice. So one of the papers I wrote over the summer was for words for kiln, furnace, stove, oven, and there's one category, the Chinese lu word, but in Vietnamese specifically, it has a low back vowel, law, which is separate from the later Sino-Vietnamese character reading, lo, which is, that's a later borrowing. The law is the spoken word, and the only other language I could find with law in it was Khmer. And so it is interesting. I don't think Khmer could have borrowed that from Chinese, which would have had either u or o. That's the most common form, as you can see, the Middle Chinese lu. It is in later Arab borrowings, but this aw form specifically is only in Vietnamese and Khmer. Okay. Another group is Dao, is for kiln, or sometimes other broader meaning, stove. It's in Thai and Lao. It is in southern China, but this is, kind of a little bit west then of Vietnamese and Khmer. If we go a little farther west and a little farther north still, we have these two Zhao and Yao forms, which are widespread, but not in mainland Southeast Asia, not much in mainland Southeast Asia. So we have kind of a geographic spread. There's one more, and I don't have a lot of information about it. It seems to be an Austroasiatic innovation. But the others are all Chinese loanwords for kiln. They've spread in the region. The geography of the top 3 items broadly match 3 regions noted in an archaeological study of kilns in mainland Chinese style kilns in mainland Southeast Asia. So that's what I've written about in that article that will be coming out in more details there. So, okay, last words for brick and tile. Okay, again, this is not vessels, but brick and tile are both types of ceramics. And this word it for brick, the earliest evidence is in Old Khmer from the 600s, basically the mid-1st millennium. The source is most likely Indic, Various people have noted Pali Ita, and actually in Munda it is something like Ita. They borrowed it in Munda that way, but in the other languages just It. So we have this kind of Indic into Old Khmer, and then other languages in the region. It is in Dayak, but in Dayak mainly in mainland Southeast Asia. Okay, so this is a mainland Southeast Asian spread word. Ngwa, which is from the Chinese Wa. Okay, originally it had a ng onset. My point of reference is the Han Dynasty in Vietic, and I've written about this, and it has the off-glide ya, like in this late Han Chinese reconstruction Y, in Vietnamese it's Ngoy, and I believe this then to be a quite old one. And there's archaeological evidence in northern Vietnam of many, many thousands of Chinese style tiles. And so, yes. Okay, there are some other forms. In the interest of time, I will not discuss them, but these, I have less to say about them. I think they're second millennium items, and I don't have enough information to say more about them. Thought, those upper two appear to be an instance of that sort of Indosphere versus the Sinosphere, but in the domain of ceramics. Right? These Indic style bricks over in mainland Southeast Asia towards the south, Chinese style tiles up in northern Vietnam, potentially from the West Han Dynasty in the BCE era. That's possible because that's when the tiles were there, 200 BCE, something like that. Okay, so some concluding observations. The big picture is what I presented. These pottery words of various language origins, okay, Austroasiatic, Dayak, Sinitic, and others, they have widespread distribution in mainland Southeast Asia, and sometimes they are largely restricted to mainland Southeast Asia and didn't spread to other areas. Okay, so what that shows us, we can assume early trade routes, obviously, that sort of something. And I'm missing one word in there. It should be borders, kind of a border. There's a difference between Dayak in mainland Southeast Asia and Dayak in southern China. That's what the data shows. All right, so okay, good. And then we obviously expect migrations and settlements of groups with ceramic production practices. This is a very broad statement, but I think it's necessary to make such a statement, that that's what this the spread of and geographic distribution of the words shows us. As far as Austroasiatic history, some of the words are concentrated in Austroasiatic languages, and I think this is evidence of early Austroasiatic trade routes, specifically around the Mon and Khmer kingdoms before the Dai expansion. And as for Chinese, oh boy, lots of Chinese words in this. Okay, many Chinese loan words for vessels and kilns and other objects, of course, spread throughout mainland Southeast Asia. Early loan words may show the spread of stoneware production. As I mentioned earlier, the interest of figuring out how stoneware practices from China spread into the region, or how much was locally innovated. But I think these loanwords do suggest, Chinese presence, Chinese influence. Many words also spread later via dialects and Vietnamese. Okay, so it's more complicated. It's Chinese directly or Chinese indirectly. Evidence of language contact. This all suggests evidence of language contact via trade and bilingualism of Sinitic speaking settlers. And lastly, questions. This data offers many research questions for myself, but for historical linguists, for archaeologists, I think, and for ethnohistorians. And I genuinely hope that people outside of the field of historical linguistics take a look at this data and see if there's something they can use it for, figure things out, answer additional questions, or they can help me figure things out. That would be great. So having ended with some questions, I would appreciate any of your questions, comments, suggestions. And if you are unable to communicate with me, please do feel free to send me email. I would love to get more ideas and suggestions, and questions can also be helpful. So thank you very much.